Welcome back to another episode of Why Do I Do That? Today's episode, the question is, why do I feel so afraid to tell people about what happened to me? And it's actually such an interesting one because it came from a question box on Instagram from somebody who was admiring the fact that I had put the content that I had put out on social media and that I speak so freely about my past experiences. And I have a little bit to say on that and a little bit to say on something that has recently blown up on Instagram and the responses that I've had to that. But I want to first answer the question. So the reason that you feel afraid to tell people about what happened to you is the first thing that I can think of is it means that you have to accept that it actually happened, that it truly happened, because a lot of the time you can tell yourself in your head that something's happened or that something's happening, but once you say it out loud, it makes it real. And a lot of the time we can't handle it being real. I have so many traumatized clients who they can't even say the word. They'll tiptoe around the words molested or raped or whatever it is. They'll tiptoe around the words because they can't say it out loud because it's so triggering to their nervous system and to their body to make it real and to say it out loud. And it brings this whole new level of feeling to their trauma once it's actually real. To say it out loud, but to then say it to family is a whole other situation because there's repercussions that come from that. And then to say it to the world is a whole different level. So I will kind of talk about those levels, but the first part is we're so afraid to tell people about what happened to us for the obvious reason that one, we have to accept that it truly happened, but two, what if people don't believe us? What if you tell somebody about what happened to you and they don't believe you? Or even worse, what if they attack you? What if they not just don't believe you, but say you're wrong and you're this and you're that, and they actually turn around and attack you? And again, this comes back to our fear of being judged, our fear of not being accepted, this subsequent aloneness that comes from that. If I speak about what happened to me, people might not believe me, and then my family might not believe me, and then they might cut me out and I might end up completely alone. And so I talk about this all the time, probably on every episode, because it's one of the deepest core beliefs and fears that we have is being alone and having no one around us, not having our community, our tribe, whatever you want to call it, not having those people around us is one of our deepest fears. And I believe that that's where this not being believed is coming from. It's coming from this fear of rejection and the subsequent aloneness. And I remember I was so scared to tell my brother and sister. I wasn't scared to tell my mum when all of my trauma came up. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, my first episode, I speak about my life story. And in subsequent episodes, I talk about repressed memories and how my repressed memories came up. But essentially, when I had told my mum about what had happened to me with my dad, she was obviously shocked, but she was very loving and accepting. I wasn't 100% sure of the response that I was going to get from my brother and sister because I didn't know whether it had happened to them too. So for reference, my dad sexually abused me for most of my childhood. I didn't know if it had happened to them too. I didn't know if maybe it had just happened to me. And if it had just happened to me, maybe they wouldn't believe me. I was so afraid of losing them because I love them so much. And luckily for me, they both straight away believed me and were very supportive and loving. And we made the decision together to all cut our father out of our lives, for them for different reasons too. But for me, it was a really good ending. But for a lot of my clients, they know their families and they know that if they are to actually speak up, they're probably not going to be believed or they're going to be cut from the family. And so to that, I would say two parts. One part is we have to think about what we want. Like, what do you actually want? When you say, I'm afraid to speak up, what are you going to get out of speaking up? Because for me, it was really important to speak up. I felt like being silenced for so long, it was like, it felt cathartic to say what had happened and to get it out and to now speak about it. My father, as I've mentioned on social media, is not in jail, and it is not a pathway that I choose to go down, but speaking up to me and telling the world what I've experienced and what he's done and how it's affected me and how I've healed from it is so cathartic and so healing for me that's my why. But I have often had to consider why I do what I do. Why do I do that? Literally the podcast. Why I do what I do and what I want to get from it. And for some people, speaking up isn't necessarily the best thing for them, for their mental health, for their livelihood. And we have to consider that it's not always the best pathway. And I'm not ever advocating for people not to speak up about their trauma. I absolutely am. But when it comes to these intricate sort of situations in families, it's quite complex. And if you're going to lose everybody in your family and end up completely alone, that could be completely derailing for your mental health. So we have to be strategic about when we're speaking up and who we're speaking to and what we're doing in those certain situations. And as I said, I have so many clients who have decided not to speak up, and I have so many clients who have spoken up and haven't been believed. One of the most common situations is that somebody who has been traumatized, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, by a stepfather or an uncle or a granddad or a father, speaking up can often affect the whole family dynamic. So it's often very complicated when that person is still alive or when that person is still a part of the family dynamic. For instance, if it was your mother's brother, your uncle, it's that fear of what's going to happen to my relationship with my mum. Is she going to believe me or is she going to believe her brother? And it just adds this whole layer of trauma on top of the trauma, because there is trauma and then there is speaking about your trauma and not being believed and being made to feel that you're crazy when you've already gone through so much. And that is like a whole nother layer of trauma on top of it. So we have to be strategic with our mental health and with our decisions in like what we want to achieve. So for instance, if you've cut these people out of your life already, do you need to say something? And what do you need to say? And why do you need to say it? And what part of you is that going to heal? And if you're not going to take them to court and things like that, what's going to make it feel good for you that you feel like you have kind of, taken your power back? What are the different ways that you can do that don't necessarily involve speaking up? Because it isn't for everybody. I wish it was for everybody. I wish that it was more common for people to be able to speak up and to be believed. But unfortunately, it's not. And that brings me to the second part, which is that I've experienced this. I've gone through that first wave of, I told my mum, who believed me, was very supportive, but even questions from her like, are you sure? Were super, super triggering. I was like, I wouldn't be fucking telling you if I wasn't sure. Like, I went into a little bit of a rage because even just that little bit of not being believed triggers that part of you. But she handled it well. Like I said, my brothers and sisters believe me. But on the other side, my father, when approached, or when I said to him that I no longer wanted to have him in my life because of all the things that he had done, he very quickly went out to all of his side of the family and told them a version of a story about me. And so I had to deal with death threats. I had to deal from people that you don't want death threats from. A couple of them had come out of jail recently. I had to deal with them telling me that I was making up stories, that I was trying to get attention, that I was doing it for my business and things like that. And just every angle that you could think of that I could be attacked from, I was attacked from by these people. And so, but I spoke up because I knew I could handle it at that point. And you have to have that strength already in you. And I had done a lot of healing work to get to that point. You have to have that strength within you to know that you can hold it. And so I was able to hold that. And through that, I learned the very valuable lesson of how to be the villain in somebody else's story. And it's the perfect line because that sentence alone just shows you, it's like, I can be the villain in their story because it's their story. It's not the truth, full stop. It's their story. And I just sat with that sentence and that feeling for so long. How can I be okay with being the villain in their story? And I tapped into the villain. Okay, yep, I'm this crazy person that's speaking up and telling these stories, and yep, cool, I'll play that part. I'll be that person for you. You can say that that's who I am, and that can be your story, and that's fine, because my story that I know to be true is that you are also a part of the problem. You are also ... whatever my story is. And so I was like so okay with being the villain in their story. And that work has helped me with them in being able to hold stories in a divorce, in friendship situations, in everything going forward in life. I've been able to be, okay, I can be the villain in your story. And I have often been able to flip it and find a way to make these funny stories about me become a way that I can see myself taking more power and feeling more powerful. So I did all of that work on being the villain and on being able to be the villain in someone else's story and on feeling into power of that and in being okay with speaking up, with not being believed, with all of that, to get to the point where I started the podcast, to get to the point where probably even prior to that, spoke about it on Instagram. That was a huge day. I remember the day that I did like a life story sequence of stories, and I was shaking. I put it up and then I took it down, and then I put it up again, and then I made myself put my phone down and walk away, and I was so triggered. But I opened my phone up a few hours later to not 10, not 20, not 40, hundreds of messages of love, of support, of people believing me, of people saying, I remember this in high school. I remember that about you. I remember meeting him. I remember it was all of these things of just validation, of love, of support. And again, I am maybe an anomaly, but that helped me to then get the courage to speak up more, to help more people, to then start the podcast. And since starting the podcast, I've been creating snippets. If you follow along on social media, I have snippets of this podcast that I use for content. And recently, there was a snippet that was created, which was created by somebody else for me. And it was a snippet where I talk about, sort of in detail, the night where my dad raped me. And I talk about being at his house, and it starts off with, I'm at his house and he asks me to stay, and I feel like I shouldn't, and I feel like I don't want to, but I feel like I couldn't say no. And for anyone who knows trauma and knows the freeze response and knows grooming and knows Stockholm syndrome and all the things, it makes sense. But to anybody else, it doesn't. And so I go on to say, and then I was laying in my bed, and as soon as I heard the door open, I knew what he was coming to do. Now, I cut the clip before I said what he actually did because I felt like it was too intense for social media. But what happened is that because I cut the clip, there was a lot of people who didn't firstly understand that I was speaking about my dad, which I then had to edit into the comments, because what's happened is this reel has taken off to, I'm not sure where it's at the moment, but it was at 1.5 million the other day, 3,000 plus comments, and people have taken it in two completely different ways. And if I was to have not done all of the work that I've done, it would derail me, some of the things that people were saying. There are people that are saying that I am an eternal victim, that I caused this myself, that it was my own fault for staying. Someone actually wrote that how was he supposed to know that me laying there frozen wasn't consent? There are people who have said that I consented by saying that I was going to stay the night. There are people that there was all sorts of comments. And it was kind of this moment where I realized you would think that it would be something that would be really triggering, but it was the first comment, to be honest, I was like, okay, that's got some heat on it. And I was a little bit like, wow, a bit taken back, because to be fair, I had uploaded it not really thinking anything. None of my other reels in a while had taken off, and I just didn't even consider that it would go viral until I woke up in the morning and there was just thousands of comments and views. So I was a little bit taken aback when I first read it. And then I started to notice the pattern, and a lot of people were jumping on the bandwagon, which is how the algorithm works. And I noticed that I was just really interested about how they had taken what I had said and created this story in their own mind, and how they had come up with these conclusions as to what I should and shouldn't have done, and couldn't actually understand, no matter how much I probably could have tried to make them understand. They just couldn't understand that response. They just couldn't get their head around how that could be possible, that I would stay there with somebody who felt unsafe. And there was one lady who argued this blue in the face, and she had like 20 people arguing back with her, and she was just, and I'm just Julie in my feed the whole time, because she just kept coming back to like, yeah, but this and that, and she should have, and she was just arguing on and on and on. And again, coming back to the point, I actually didn't even really have to write very much on this post at all, because I had so many people come in and start responding to all of these people that had these fucked up views and saying, what is wrong with you? Don't you understand trauma? Do you know what the freeze response is? Like, so many people come in and say, that's not right, whatever it is. But if I had have been afraid of speaking up and been afraid of what was going to happen from that and taken that post down, I wouldn't have had the growth that I've had and the support that I've also noticed. So it was one of those moments where I realized like how far I've actually come, because I literally just see the messages now, and they still come in nearly every day. I literally see the comments and I just roll my eyes. I think I've actually started writing back to some of them, because to be honest, apart from this one woman, all of the others have been men that have been writing the comments saying it's your own fault and you shouldn't have stayed. I've literally just been writing pipe down with whatever their name is. Just pipe down, Charlie, pipe down, Kev, and just like not even giving zero fucks, just telling them to pipe down and letting it go, because in their mind, I am this attention-seeking, seductive person who lured some man into this situation and then said no, and now I'm shaming him publicly. Like, that is their story. And I just have to be okay with being the villain in their story and in that story that they're creating about me, and just know my own truth. And this is one of the hardest things to do as somebody who has experienced a lot of trauma, is know your truth and know this is actually what happened to me, because we get so confused and gaslit and told we're crazy, and that's all part of the trauma. And so getting to that point where you've healed enough to know your truth, I think that you'll find that if you start to 100% like stand in that and know who you are, and know that what happened to you and that it created whatever it created in your life, and know how it affected you and know how you're going to heal it and all of that, you're going to feel so much more comfortable going into conversations, because you will know your own truth, and you will know that any story that anybody else comes up with is their own story based off their own experiences and their own beliefs and their own truth, and that actually has nothing to do with you. So I feel like I just went on a massive tangent, but I hope that I did answer that question, at least initially, as to why you're afraid and as to the different scenarios of what can happen and how bad it can get, but also how you can learn to hold it and how you can learn to that actually is possible for you. So if you know somebody who has experienced trauma, who wants to speak up, or somebody who has spoken up and been attacked or anything, send them this episode. I'm sure they will be able to hard relate.